I'd like to welcome you all to the second, actually, Thomas H. Scholl Lecture by Visiting Entrepreneurs. This is a lecture that is supported, a lecture series that is supported by a gift from Stevens Board of Trustee, member Thomas H. Scholl, general partner at Novak Biddle Venture Partners, and a highly successful high-tech entrepreneur and inventor. This lecture features notable visiting entrepreneurs and executives who have started successful businesses or improved the financial performance of existing companies. With that, I'm going to go very quickly through the program. We are going to have a little ceremony right after the lecture for our inventors. And you will hear more about it from the chair of the innate chapter of Stevens, Dr. Vicky Hazelwood. With that, I'd like to ask Professor Kofiatis, Provost and Vice President, University Vice President of Stevens Institute of Technology, to come and say a few words about innovation at Stevens. George.
Thank you, Chris. It's a great pleasure to be here, a great pleasure to see you. Young and older, more mature entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs to be. Chris asked me to give a couple of remarks about why innovation and why entrepreneurship and why at Stevens. So the answers to those questions, for those of you that you've been here and know Stevens, are pretty obvious. If you look at the history, if you look at the legacy, if you look at the founders of this institution, if you look at the roots of where the Institute was founded upon, the principles are all revolving around innovation and entrepreneurship. And for many years, this great country has flourished, and the economic growth and prosperity that has followed is a result of innovation and entrepreneurship, supported by a great economic system of free enterprise and the ingenuity of people from all over the world that found a great home here in the United States. The growth, both in economic terms, in prosperity, that this country has experienced is phenomenal and unprecedented. So today, we owe everything that we have, in my mind, on the innovation and entrepreneurship spirit and actions of those that took advantage of this great country and have created it to the point that we're today. Now, if you look at the global picture today, you'll also see that the rest of the world understands the importance of innovation, understands the importance of entrepreneurship, wants to emulate the US success in their own countries, and they're making tremendous investments to achieve it. And you all, or some of you have more than others, have experienced that when you travel overseas and visit different universities and different places. Why, however, at a university, this is very important? I think it's a national mandate. It's expressed by our political leadership, but not in those terms, not in the terms of a national mandate. But in reality, it is. Why? Because unless we keep in the forefront of innovation, unless we continue to cultivate the systems in this country that promote the free thinking, the creative thinking, the thinking of innovation, and the practice of entrepreneurship, we are going to, unfortunately, lose this technological edge that we have that for such a long period of time has brought economic growth and prosperity in this country. That's why it's a national mandate. So why at a university? Well, because in the past, universities have contributed to the flow of new ideas. However, we have not made specific attempts or specific efforts to bridge that gap between the research and development efforts that happen within the university with the business world that takes it into a product or a service. And you'll see a great move over the past 5, 10 short years that every university now understands that cultivating innovation and promoting entrepreneurship is an integral part of the university business and the university core values for the future. It's unavoidable. And people that they're not practicing and people that they're not pursuing it will follow, will not lead in the future. So educating the next generations to be more entrepreneurial, to be more innovative, to be more creative in the way that they approach their professional lives and their contributions to society, especially as it pertains to technological innovation and entrepreneurship, will be critical for this country to maintain the leadership that has established, that it took so many years to establish. Critical. That's why it is a national mandate. That's why universities have to respond to the national need. Depending on who you listen to, 80 to 90% of our wealth today is derived through technology, I should say, not by technology, but through technology. If you really look at the number of people, the 4% of the workforce that directly is responsible for creation of technology, I think is too small. I think we have to grow it. We're not going to grow it. If technical universities or technical schools and technology schools, engineering sciences within bigger universities do not take the lead in creating, in increasing that pool of people that are responsible for the creation of technology, that provide wealth for the other 96% of the population, the means for wealth, then we're not going to keep our global lead in this area. And what does that mean? That means that the prosperity and comfort and great living that we have enjoyed over the past several decades will subside, will not continue at the pace that the rest of the world is. So I think that this effort that our speaker has started recently of NAI, the National Academy of Inventors, is another critical contribution to that mandate of creating a workforce that is technologically literate. We argue what is the role of a technological university, and we argue that if you look around and you look at schools that are dedicated to liberal arts, for example, they're in a crisis, really. They're trying to redefine themselves. Why? Because the world is driven by technology. And the world is not for people. The future world is not going to be for people that are technically illiterate. So how you infuse technical literacy in STEM into the humanities, for example, and social sciences, and the liberal arts is going to be critical in the future. So technical universities have to take the lead and have to respond to this national mandate. So I want to congratulate our speaker that is going to be introduced by Chris in a couple of seconds for this effort, because it contributes to this national mandate and it responds to a dramatic need. I'm sad and I'm disappointed that innovation and entrepreneurship has not become the #1 mandate in the United States. And our political leadership fails to see that after we lost our manufacturing base and we decided to become a service society, and then in 10 years we outsource all of our services, I wonder how people do not understand the criticality, the critical juncture that we are of what we're going to do next, where we're going to be best next. And the answer just stares us in the face, is staying in the forefront of putting the next generation of technologies in the marketplace, cultivating them, and that way ensuring our superiority and our economic security and financial and economic security, but also maintaining and enhancing our standard of living in the future. So it is critical, and I know you know it, but just now you heard it one more time. So nice to see you here, and I'm grateful to our speaker for agreeing to address us today.
Thank you, George. It is really great pleasure that I will introduce to you today's speaker at the Thomas H. Scholl Lecture by Visiting Entrepreneur, Dr. Paul Sanberg. Dr. Sanberg is Senior Vice President for Research and Innovation, Distinguished University Professor, and Executive Director of the Center of Excellence for Aging and Brain Repair at the University of South Florida, and founder and president of the National Academy of Inventors. He studied biology at York University in Toronto, then attended the University of British Columbia to study medical sciences. He earned his PhD in neurological science at the Australian National University in 1981, and his doctoral in science at the Australian National University in 1998. He has held academic positions at Ohio University, the University of Cincinnati, and Brown University. He is an inventor on approximately 100 health-related patents and an academic entrepreneur. His work has been instrumental in translating new pharmaceutical and cellular therapeutics to clinical trials and commercialization for Tourette syndrome, stroke, ALS, Alzheimer's, Huntington's, and Parkinson's disease, and has significant biotech and pharmaceutical industry experience in these areas. He is the co-founder of Ceneron CCEL Therapeutics and Natura Therapeutics in Tampa, Florida, and Stem Cells, Inc. in Palo Alto, California. He is the author of more than 600 scientific publications and is highly cited scientist with more than 20,000 citations to his published work. He is a fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science, a charter fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, and serves on the evaluation committee on the National Medal of Technology and Innovation. Extremely accomplished. Dr. Sanberg serves on editorial boards for more than 30 scientific journals and has received numerous scientific awards. He received the 2011 Everfront Award at the 4th Pan-Pacific Symposium on Stem Cell and Cancer Research in Tongchang, Taiwan. The Everfront Award honors outstanding research contributions to stem cell and cancer research, including preclinical, clinical, and translational work, and is presented to researchers at the forefront of his or her field. Dr. Sanberg has been a tireless researcher in stem and cell therapy research for many years. But that's not the reason he's here today. In addition to being a world-class scientist, Dr. Sanberg is an ardent supporter of academic entrepreneurship and faculty engagement in entrepreneurial activities, including commercialization. In an article co-authored by Paul, published in Journal of Technology and Innovation in 2011, entitled The Role of Patents and Commercialization in the Tenure and Promotion Process, the authors state, many university tenure policies continue to reflect the traditional view that patent and commercialization activities by faculty members will either detract from their laboratory and student mentoring obligations or pose a conflict of interest in regard to revenue generation. While these concerns should remain part of the conversation, universities need to also consider expanding the traditional role of their faculty and staff in order to play a larger role in global economic development by investing in the creative innovations of young faculty, and I highlight that, young faculty. Today, educational institutions may lessen the pressure to translate their research endeavors into useful, applicable, and timely solutions to contemporary global concerns. In other words, get them young and incentivize them, which is contrary to the traditional view that junior faculty should not participate in IP development and commercialization activities. In today's lecture, Dr. Sanberg will discuss the process of technical innovation in an academic setting. His presentation title is From Lab to Market, Academic Innovation and the National Academy of Inventors. I would like to thank Paul for taking the time out of his busy schedule to fly to Hoboken and share with us his views and experience on this important academic activity and the external societal pressures that are forcing universities to adopt a new role, that of academic entrepreneurship, which signifies in many ways a paradigm shift in higher education, both nationally and internationally. And with that, I will ask Paul to come and give us his wisdom. Thank you.
Thanks, Christos. Well, thanks. This is quite the place. I've been here for less than a day and already super impressed. I want to thank the provost. I mean, it sounded like a politician there, but it was great. You said everything the way it is. And who would have thought we'd be at a university where the president, the provost, vice president, et cetera, started companies and believe in entrepreneurship. There aren't many of these places in the world, and you have a real jump start in changing the culture. So it's just a great place. Thank you for inviting me. So what I thought I would do is give you a bit of a talk. First, a little bit about my research, some of the things that I've gone through, and then tell you about the NAI a bit. So, as a medical scientist, I always look for different aspects of things. And one of the things I looked at, and I always kind of look at different things, but one of the things I looked at was why nicotine was so important, and was studying in the brain different kinds of receptors for various drugs. I studied drugs of abuse for a number of years. I never inhaled. No, just joke. This is on TV too, isn't it? So I shouldn't say, no. But basically, I'm still on the council of the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And I think that understanding drugs of abuse and how they work in the brain is absolutely critical to this. So some of the studies I did in the 80s and 90s was really looking at how does nicotine work? And why are we seeing so many patients that were using so much nicotine, especially schizophrenics? In those days when we had hospitals and we were training, and you would see a schizophrenic and they would have yellow fingers, because they'd be holding cigarettes so much and smoking. And thought maybe they were self-medicating in some way. And so we looked at the ability of nicotine to affect neuroleptic drugs or antipsychotic drugs. And we actually found that it enhanced the effects of antipsychotic drugs in animals. So we were looking then at what other kinds of uses are there for these drugs, and one of them, of course, was Tourette syndrome. And Tourette syndrome, I don't know how many people know about Tourette syndrome, but Tourette syndrome is one where they might have tics, movement tics, or they might blurt out obscenities because they have an inability to inhibit themselves. So they have this disinhibition. And one way to treat them, especially in those days, was with Haldol, which was an anti-schizophrenic drug. And so the problem with that was you're almost creating a chemical straitjacket in some ways. So the thought was, could we actually reduce the dose of this drug by giving nicotine? Well, first of all, I had a bunch of hurdles to go through. Giving nicotine to children. Okay, imagine trying to do that. Because Tourette syndrome, especially in children, is pretty difficult. And so one of the things we did first was, of course, Nicorette gum was out first. And so here we had an opportunity to administer Nicorette gum and see if it had an effect in patients. So the first paper, for example, in '88, shows that, in fact, we did find that by giving nicotine gum, it did stop the tics for a while, and if it was co-administered with Haldol. And this was really unique. Now you come up to another problem. What happens to a child when you give nicotine gum? Anyone think about that? Has anyone ever tried nicotine gum? Well, you're supposed to chew it and park it, kind of like tobacco, right? It's not something you want to chew like bubble gum and then swallow. So the kids had gastrointestinal effects and made it, the compliance of this not as good. So we were kind of halted in the research in some sense until the drug companies came through with the nicotine patch. And so immediately we thought, well, maybe we could give the nicotine patch and that might help. And now this was a little different now because with a gum, you're getting that bolus of nicotine like you do with a cigarette almost, where you get a release over a short period of time into the body. So the pharmacokinetics are a little more rapid. With a nicotine patch, you're now looking at a constant delivery. And so the question was, would this work? In fact, we found that it might work by giving the nicotine patch with Haldol in the Tourette's kids or in some other patients, some adults with it. And so that was quite unique for us. And being a scientist, though, one has to think, when you have a nicotine patch and now you're giving it to these patients, you're going to look at side effects. And so we did a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. We published it in the psychiatric journals. This was funded by the NIH. And we found that, in fact, there were increased some gastrointestinal effects compared to placebo of giving nicotine. So while many folks, in fact, wanted to give nicotine patch because we got a beneficial effect on the tics, in many cases you really have to think about what are the side effects of the drug. This led to another thought process. And the other thought process really was, how does nicotine work? And so one of the thoughts we had for this kind of effect of nicotine, of a transdermal effect that you're getting this constant dose, was actually, instead of stimulating nicotine receptors in the brain, we were actually inhibiting nicotine receptors in the brain. So this became a novel thought, a novel kind of approach that perhaps by down-regulating, kind of like when you're going outside, you're in a movie theater, and your photoreceptors are very sensitive, and then you go out into the light, and your photoreceptors decrease. Okay, you've inhibited your photoreceptors, and so we thought, well, maybe that's what was happening with this effect. So we were looking for a drug, actually, then, that would actually inhibit nicotine, not stimulate it. And our theory then would suggest that, in fact, since this was not obvious, that maybe by inhibiting nicotine in the brain, we would, in fact, get a similar beneficial effect. So we looked for a drug. We looked through the physician's desk reference manual, and I found a drug called Mechamelamine. It was a Merck drug that was the first orally available antihypertensive drug from the 1950s, and they weren't hardly using it anymore. So being the entrepreneur as well, the thought was, well, we've got to get access to this. But first we tried it, and we found that, in fact, when you gave Mechamelamine, we saw the same kinds of effects. We saw this decrease in tics, vocalization, et cetera, in these kids. And they do have behavioral problems as well, and those seem to be responding positively, at least in open trials. So then something fortuitous happened. We started to prescribe the medication, and we couldn't get it anymore for the patients. So most people, I think, would say, oh, well, let's move on to something else. But in this case, like most of you at an innovation university would probably say, you know, let's go talk to Merck and see why. Turns out that they had made all their drug. It was a very stable drug. They weren't selling much of it for its purpose anymore. And so we got a number of investors together, a company called Latent Bioscience out of California, and we made an offer to buy the drug and the NDA that they had in order to remanufacture it and get it on the market. So that was done. And it turned out that there were sales for this drug, and there were other off-label uses of this drug, including urinary aspects and a number of other aspects that people used for it because as well. So what we found, in fact, with Mechamelamine was that it potentiated Haldol in animals, remember the anti-schizophrenic drug, and we then did a double-blind placebo-controlled trial exploring the safety of it in Tourette's disorder and found a beneficial effect. But when it was given alone, it didn't have an effect. So Mechamelamine alone did not. But it was, again, this idea of a synergistic effect with this other drug. We purchased, I said, in 2000 the NDA, and we filed a lot of patents related to other uses of this drug besides cardiovascular. So we started then to look at a side effect of this drug, actually, we thought. Remember I said that Tourette syndrome has a lot of behavioral problems. So one of the problems, especially in the adults that have Tourette syndrome, is they're comorbid. That means they're associated with depression. And so what we found was, in fact, depression was reduced in these patients that were given this drug. I know I'm going really fast over a lot of clinical trials, a lot of clinical work here, but I think I'm getting to the point that we saw mood changes. And we thought that perhaps that we were getting an antidepressant effect by using this drug. And there was also other evidence out there that, in fact, the cholinergic system that nicotine and mechamelamine work on, even though opposite effects, is involved in depression as well in the body. So we then thought, well, maybe this is a possible antidepressant drug, especially in patients given other medications. Well, that leads to another inventive issue. Now, we've got a drug, we bought the NDA, we have a company, Latent Bioscience, that now has this, but there's really not much protection. So this is an old drug, a 1950s drug, and it's a racemic mixture. It has both sides of the drug, the mirror image. So then we said, well, what if one mirror image, the isomer, worked better than the other? So we started an isomer program. We then worked with a company, separated out the isomers, and then looked, and we found that, in fact, one of the isomers worked better than others. In fact, the interesting thing about this drug was one of the isomers worked in general terms, more in peripheral effects, and one more in brain effects. So we started this isomer program, and now we had a composition of matter claim, and we had patents submitted on this. And we then, it eventually got licensed to another company called Targacept. And Targacept was a spin out of R.J. Reynolds out of Winston-Salem. Because R.J. Reynolds, being a tobacco company, was really involved in understanding nicotine. So they ended up starting out a few companies related to Wake Forest University as well. So this got licensed out. They looked at it as a possible antidepressant. And eventually, it worked on a unique channel class as a blocker for neuronal nicotine receptors, as I mentioned. And it had a superior performance over mechamelamine, the racemic, as well in depression and anxiety. So let me tell you, this is the summary of where the drug is now, but let me give you a little history. Targacept then licensed the drug to AstraZeneca as a partnership. It was one of the largest licenses of a neuronal drug, that acting in the nervous system, that had been done. They did it in a number of phase 3 trials for depression as a drug by itself, and unfortunately, as most exciting things happen sometimes, the drug did not go well against the placebo effect. And when you have a drug that's in something like behavioral disorders or psychiatric disorders, many times it's hard to get past the placebo effect because in many cases, just the hope of the drug, a hope of treatment is significant. There is a large placebo effect in psychiatry. So they went back to the drawing boards and looked at, in fact, that the drug, being a cholinergic inhibitor, had significant effects in the bladder. And that, in fact, in many of the patients, it had an incredible safety profile. It had an incredible safety profile for many years, since the 50s, and that, in fact, could inhibit bladder overactivity. So the drug is now in clinical trials. So it goes from neuroscience now to overactive bladder, which is a very large market, in clinical trials based on 2,400 patients having gone through the depression trials. And so we will find out at some point how this drug does in overactive bladder. Now, at some point it may go back to neuroscience, but many of the neuroscience drugs that went to phase 3 have not been successful for a number of reasons, as we've seen. That's why a lot of the major pharmaceutical companies have kind of gone out of neuroscience. It's not as in favor as it was a while ago. Of course, when you have something like overactive bladder you're trying to inhibit, since it's so physiological, you hope that the placebo effect is not going to be as great. The drug is largely eliminated, unchanged in the bladder, which supports the use of low doses. The drugs used for overactive bladder right now are not drugs that people want to be on for a long time in many ways because of the side effects. So that's kind of a story. I tell you that story because it's a fun drug discovery story, but it's a story that takes you from an animal study many years ago through looking at an effect that was not obvious and taking it then and having to, as an investigator and a university, try to get the drug out, try to get it on the market again so that you could use the drug, and then taking it and going into the clinic. The university did well because if you do your license agreements during that point, then you'll get milestone payments at different levels. So the drug doesn't have to come on the market, in theory, for you to get a number of license agreements. In this case, one aspect of the drug was on the market. But when you're a company, a large company, then they start looking at different aspects. And that is, well, if there's a generic or a racemic on the market, is that going to help if you come out with another drug, right? So then the companies think, well, maybe we should take this drug off the market so that in case another drug comes off. Now, the drug was being used by a number of patients, the original drug, so right now there is no drug on the market or available for people that want to use it for other uses. I tell you one other thing about this drug that was unique to me, and that is, here's an example of the patent based on the Isomer. But I did this at a university when I first got to University of South Florida, at a university that was not the Innovation University. University of South Florida had about $30 million in research. It was I went there because I was coming from Brown at the time, and I was looking for a place I could go that had palm trees and was, and was just a great place to be in Florida. How many medical schools are there in the tropics? Not a lot. And I just got enticed by them. I got so enticed by a university that was ready to grow, ready to tackle things. Clearly there were a lot of faculty that were still on staff that were, in the old traditions, but there were a lot of new people that were coming on board to really try to move things forward. So I got there, and it was me, with the experience that I had, trying to pull in different people and teach them about other aspects related to entrepreneurship and innovation. And one of them was Archie Silver. Archie Silver was someone who had retired from New York as an academic psychiatrist, moved to South Florida like a lot of professors did in those days. The professors that we tended to have were those that retired from up north and then moved down to the university and started new careers. He was in his, by the time he and I had met, he was in his late 70s. And he said, "This is fun, let's do it. This is a great thing, let's go for this stuff." And so when you look at the patent, we have, by the time that patent came out, we have an 85-year-old man who had gone through a traditional academic career, an undergrad, and a postdoc who's now a professor in the center. And this is what entrepreneurship's all about. It's about grabbing these people, changing the culture, getting these new people involved, and all of these have done well in their lives because of this research that they did. Unfortunately, Dr. Silver's not here. He died at 92, but he died knowing that at least he left a legacy, and in fact, one of the centers now at the University of South Florida is named after him. Another area that has been a real strong focus of my research has been trying to replace cells in the body, or regenerative medicine, and that is use those areas that we see degenerated cells and try to get cells to either regrow or put new cells in as well. So I've been working on this for many years and really went through a whole bunch of phases. One was using animal cells into the human. We were involved in clinical trials, putting in Parkinson's patients, putting primate cells in, for example. We were looking at bovine cells into ALS patients. We've looked at encapsulated cells with polymers to encapsulate them from the immune system. We've done those in patients. And then stem cells came around. Stem cells had been around in the cancer field, but what we were doing was really looking at stem cells with other uses. And could we put in these new stem cells, and could they regrow, or could they produce recovery in various things? So we had focused a lot on neurodegenerative disorders and stroke, and we're still focusing on that. And this is a very important area that I feel very strongly about. Important thing about stem cells is they self-renew. We now know that we can get them from an adult. And being in Florida, we had a political issue. And what was the political issue that I had to deal with in Florida? Well, at the time of stem cells were getting politically challenged because everyone thought they were just from an embryonic source, embryonic stem cells, and that we'd have to get rid of a blastocyst or an embryo in order to use stem cells. We had a governor that was brother of the President of the United States. And this governor, Jeb Bush, clearly, wanted to make sure that we followed the guidelines, the federal guidelines, and which we did, that about embryonic stem cells. Our approach, though, was to use adult stem cells. And so we were the first group, in fact, to look for stem cells in other areas, other tissues that would relate to the brain. So the first thing we did was we would go around and we would get cells from bone marrow. Now we know that most cancer hospitals have a bone marrow unit for bone marrow transplantation, For those of you that aren't in the health field, primarily bone marrow transplantation is to provide stem cells, new stem cells, to the patient. You know, they get under chemo, you myeloablate them, you get rid of the bone marrow, you put in new cells, and you create a new immune system, essentially, for the person, and new blood cells and everything, hematopoietic system. So that's the important part of that. And then so what we did is we got some bone marrow cells, and we tweaked them. We used various ways to modify them, and we administered them to animals that had strokes. And we found that they helped the stroke in the animals, and we could make these blood-derived cells into brain cells. And so we ended up being the first to publish that, even though I think at UMDNJ, shortly after us, there was a publication. We were the first ones to get the patent issued on bone marrow cells to brain cells for brain repair as well. And so that was really important for us. But then we came to a challenge. And in those days, the challenge was, just like a lot, was we couldn't get bone marrow cells. I would go to my colleagues who were surgeons, you know, chest surgeons or whatever, and I'd say, you know, just a little scoop of cells maybe, you know, there or something if you're doing something. And it didn't work, you know, and even during those days, the old days, we couldn't do that. So we were looking for another source. And it just so happened that the only publicly traded umbilical cord blood company at the time was based in Tampa. And the guy had seen me on TV for some reason, and he called me up, the owner of the company, and he said, you know, I can provide you some umbilical cord blood cells. Now, we knew at that time that umbilical cord blood cells, or high-end stem cells, could be used in place of bone marrow for children. You couldn't get the volumes at that time for children for bone marrow transplants, but you could, I mean, for adults, but you could do it in children. So I said, great, get us some, we'll see. So we looked at the idea of using umbilical cord blood cells, and we found that, in fact, so a year later after the bone marrow, we could actually transform umbilical cord blood cells to neural-like cells as well. So we filed for patents under those, and we ended up getting some good technology based on that, and that's where the startup that you heard about earlier is focused on, is using umbilical cord blood stem cells for a number of things. We've taken this. Now, one of the other things we do as a university, since I'm at a university, I'm not in a company per se, is I believe wholeheartedly in the university. I'm a senior vice president of the university. I believe wholeheartedly that we need to change the culture. The university needs to get its share, its fair share. And so we use, in many ways, when you start a lot of these companies, we use them as opportunities to get federal grants or other kinds of funds to the university. And that's another thing that's really important. Even though we all talk about royalties, I can tell you that at my university, I look at the numbers, how many federal grants could we not have applied for if we didn't have intellectual property? In the case of this one, for example, we have a phase 2 STTR grant for $2.7 million to look at Alzheimer's disease mice, transgenic mice with Alzheimer's disease. That comes mainly through the company as an STTR, but mainly funds the university research. Okay? Now you have to deal with conflicts of interest. I'm a vice president, et cetera, so I pull out and we deal with these kinds of issues as well. But there are ways to deal with these issues, and there are ways to bring other kinds of funding to universities through these startup companies. So I think those kinds of things are absolutely important as well. This just shows some of the first results we got where we saw a benefit in stroke. So the one on the right is a neurological exam, believe it or not, in an animal, and we show an effect compared to controls of a beneficial effect in the stroked animal. But there's one other thing that we did that I thought was quite unique, and that was, up until this time, all the work that we had done in the brain was all injecting directly in the brain with neurosurgery. So we'd have to go in, and we'd inject in the brain, and that you're already looking at tens of thousands of dollars of operation funds in order to fund that kind of research and those kinds of clinical trials. Now we're dealing with blood cells, and we're dealing with homing of stem cells to sites of inflammation. So now the opportunity was, could we administer intravenously a group of blood-derived stem cells, get them to home to the site of injury, and produce recovery of function. New thought, not obvious, and again becomes the basis for new technology that is now being studied all over the world of administering cells intravenously or intraarterially and looking for effects of reducing damage through stem cells. We were one of the first to do this, and just yesterday, or this morning, there was a paper that came out in heart attack, where they've given multiple intravenous injections in heart attack research as well. So it's an area that's getting a lot of things. Now, it doesn't have to be cord blood cells. It could be other types of cells. But this whole idea of intravenous injection because we now know these homing molecules of cells being directed to the site of injury is so important. We also looked at timing. And that is, since the site of injury of something is so acute, we wanted to look at timing of this, for example. When do we administer the cells? So when you look at, you're getting into health more and more at this university, and you have to start then taking it to the next level. You can all say, well, I have a cell, from my left foot, someone's left foot that could be useful for treatment. That's something to say. But when you actually take it to treatment, you have to deal with dosing. You have to deal with site of administration. You have to deal with timing of it. You have to deal with what other medications. You have to deal with the heterogeneity of the patients. There's so many things to deal with. And so we looked at this, and one of the things we found was there's a sweet spot. And following stroke, there's an early damage that occurs in the first day. As you know, that if you do have a stroke, and for us men that don't want to say that, we fight it off, it's nothing, get to the hospital as soon as possible, because it's that first 3 to 6 hours that we have TPA for, that can remove clots and things. But the average time for a man to get to the hospital is 13 hours. You're past that window, okay? So please, if you do have one listening to my talk or something, please go out there and go there. But the important thing is, in regenerative medicine, after this initial short-term period, we see that there's now recruitment for cells from the outside, okay? There's this recruitment for stem cells. There's a migration of cells to come in. And it's this short-term period that occurs around 2 days to 3 days following a stroke that is so critical. And we find that we can actually reduce the dose, because I could show you all sorts of results where, yeah, we found cord blood worked, but you would have to give the equivalent of 20 cords in order to get that to work in a human. Impossible. So the idea was, how can we reduce the dose? And we found that if we take that, we reduce it, we find a sweet spot, we can actually find that and do other things and get that down to 1 cord per patient. Even some of our data is 5 patients per cord, for example. So we found this sweet spot. And this has become now pretty well in the literature. And this was the very first trial. This is Sean Savitz on the left, and this is Bud Hendrick. And he received the very first intravenous injection of bone marrow cells. Remember, you could use different kinds, in stroke at UT Houston. But the interesting thing, it was an NIH-sponsored study. But if you look at the bottom sentence there, it says within 24 to 72 hours. Because some of the reasons people weren't getting effects is they don't understand this, they didn't find it. They go, we'll give it a week later. The blood-brain barrier is sealed, hard to get things in. There's no inflammatory molecules to cause homing, okay? And what we found was with different kinds of injuries, spinal cord injury, heart ischemia, a number of things, the timing of that window is different. So you have to know these things in order to translate positively into the clinic. Okay, so one of the other things that I've tried to push is that perhaps when we talk about transplantation of stem cells, that this is really something that has been going on as a species in mammalians for millions of years. And that in fact, the umbilical cord blood that gets transferred from mother to offspring is in fact one that is mankind or humankind's first stem cell transplant. this depicts through history natural childbirth. We do know that, in fact, that in the last 80 years or so, 50 to 80 years, there has been this push to clamp the cord. Okay? But up to that point of thousands of years, humans never clamped the cord. Okay? Just like other species, the cord would pulsate, and then the blood would pass to the baby. And because of volume issues and other things, OBGYNs decided that it was good to pass the cord. Let's cut it out, get the baby off and into the neonatology unit as fast as possible. There's a real push. We've been pushing this, that in fact, maybe that's not good. Because we don't know what the long-term expression is of not having these stem cells in our body, okay, for a lot of long-term diseases, maybe this isn't a good thing. And that maybe we should let a natural progression of cord blood pass to the baby. So there's a big push now for a delayed cord blood clamping. Even if you just wait a minute, there's enough cord, minute and a half, that gets in there that changes, that provides more stem cells to the baby. Okay, so that tells you a little bit about me, kind of things that I've liked doing, how we've kind of used invention and entrepreneurship in the technology. And probably, I think we all like this statement. I always like this statement, because when we do research as an academic, we have a good imagination. We like to invent. We like to be creative. But most of the time we don't have enough money. We got a pile of junk we got to work with, or we don't have the latest equipment that we want. And it's amazing what we can get done. It's absolutely amazing what we can get done with what we have. Now, you at this university, being a private university, an elite, you might have a lot better equipment than some of the mid-level state universities, but I always thought that was a good statement. And I know I put this up too because I think Thomas Edison was from New Jersey, wasn't he? So I thought that's good. So let's move on to the research life cycle. So as a vice president, the thing that I really push for is this research life cycle. And this is exactly what your university does, having talked to you at our conference this last year, as well as in the last few hours. And that is this idea of going to research contracts and grants, spinning out intellectual property, moving into startup companies, having a technology incubator, if you have that, having a research park, this whole kind of things which spins out companies and helps the local economy. So let's go through that a little. As I mentioned, one of the things in pure academics of researchers is we have to secure funding. A STEM university like this, absolutely critical. Okay, you can't do research without funding. No matter how much you charge for tuition, you will not get the differential on that to pay for research. So if you want to be successful, you have to get funding. Research has a high cost. The F&A, or indirect costs, do not support the research infrastructure anymore. In fact, there's an article that myself and Karen Holbrook, who was a past president of Ohio State, are publishing in the next few months, talking about the high cost of research. You need to build labs, equipment, staff. You need central support. You need to manage this research funding. You need to comply with regulations that are getting more and more complicated. You need to protect and develop intellectual property, and you need to spin out companies. Okay? And the more you have, the more you have to deal with. The more people that you have, the more you have to deal with. You don't have to be big to be extremely innovative. Look at this university. Incredibly productive for the size. Look at most major private universities, the same thing. It's, you get to a university like us, we have a lot of faculty, we have a lot of students. I'm telling you, there's a lot you have to deal with that if I didn't have to deal with it and I could just focus on the innovation side, it would be incredible. This is, in fact, the article here. It's coming out in Technology Innovation, but it talks about how important it is for this infrastructure, and that the expense of research for buildings, for staff, for labs, for equipment are absolutely enormous, and that the amount of F&A, and when you have the federal government come in to renegotiate your F&A now, it's a much more daunting task than it has been. We're going to go through that next year. at my university, and we're all worried about it. Okay, I expect that it's possible rates could go down, which won't help. Okay, what about step one with research contracts and grants as well? We need to find all funds that we can get. We need to diversify our portfolios. Okay, that means that we need funds from the federal agencies, state agencies, economic development organizations, counties. You have your New Jersey Economic Development Authority, but I heard at lunch that you may not have a lot of places to go to from the state. We have in Florida a matching grants program for the Florida High-Tech Corridor, which actually provides matching grants to universities for money that they bring in from companies to do research on behalf of the company and the professor that's being done. These are important initiatives that we need in order to move forward. Step two, we need intellectual property. Here's an example of one that I like. This is a nuclear physics student at USF, Alex Novitsky, and he got this patent issued, which was on a skate case. And this is a skateboard. We have a very large campus. Has anyone been to USF before? Okay, so we have a very large campus, and with over 40,000 students, and it takes a while to get back and forth. We don't have a shuttle. We don't have a rail or anything like University of West Virginia has that rail going and all this stuff. But and so a lot of kids do skateboards. Well, you do skateboards, and he wanted something he could put books and things in his skateboard, so he made this skate case. It got a patent. He started a business, and it became a business that's been fairly successful for him. He's moving forward, and it's actually there was a competition. Of potential inventions from universities and elsewhere to be on display at the Smithsonian Institution, and it'll be December 8th. And so his skate case actually will be on display at the Smithsonian Institution at the new Arts and Industry building that's just being renovated for innovation. That's him. He looks like a nuclear physics guy or a mafia man. I don't know, one or the other. Okay, startup companies. Okay, this is critical. This is critical, I'm sure, just as for Stevens as it was for USF. When 9/11 happened and Florida hit real bad times again. I mean, we hit bad times recently because of the whole financial crisis, but we hit problems in 9/11 because, as the provost said, economies should be based on entrepreneurship and innovation. Well, Florida's economy is tourism, primarily, and wealth coming from the north, with retirees. Well, when you don't have planes flying for months and months, your economy really takes a hit. So one of the things that the state did was put a new strategic plan on universities in Florida, which was they should have economic development as part of their strategic plan, which was not typical in many ways of universities that are pretty insular. So this is when I then started to look at going into administration. Part-time initially, full-time now, was this whole idea of, can we help our university get involved with economic development? Can we use what we've all learned to help our universities? So this just shows some, again, I don't know the stories of many of these companies from Stevens, but we dug them up, that you guys have a rich heritage in starting companies. Your leaders have heritages in starting companies. It's a wonderful thing from Stevens. And we do as well. We push for new companies. We push for faculty to get involved. Sometimes as a vice president, I need to go in there and maybe help instigate things to a faculty member or a chair who is from a very conservative academic background, said, this is okay. This is the direction we're moving, and it's okay for this person to do this. Incubators. I don't think you have an incubator at this point. I heard you're going to be potentially being involved in an incubator. Well, one of the reasons USF has grown so fast, I think, one is that we got new faculty on board that were entrepreneurial. But we're also the only state university in a very large population base. So Tampa Bay is about 3-odd million people, and so we're the main state university there. And so we have a responsibility, and we have a lot of students and graduates from that general area. So I've made it a real point that we want to build up our incubators, we want to build up companies, and move things. We have an incubator on campus in our research park. We also received a Department of Commerce grant for $1 million recently to start a first wave accelerator. We call it, it's an incubator downtown to help companies. And recently we've started an incubator in the county north of us, and we're starting an incubator helping to start an incubator in a county south of us. So the whole concept of incubators is starting to increase again, at least in Florida, trying to get these companies started, trying to help the local economy move forward. And they're important because they provide space and core facilities to entrepreneurs that may not have the money to put into those things. We require a robust internship program. Even if a company that's not related with our university comes in, we have a contract that they sign that they will offer internships and be involved in that part of the university. We offer boot camps. We have experts as mentors. I think that's critical. We have a council of professionals. We try to bring in as many of the entrepreneurs and mentors as possible because two things. One is they like to be mentors. They like to help. Most people that make it to a certain level want to help. As well, it gives us a nice interaction with these people for potential growth. Roundtables, networking, pitch events, etc. Then there's a research park. Now, there's a lot of research parks around. Some of them are very robust. Ours is, USF is good. It could be a lot better. We have land, but I'm willing to build new buildings without good tenants, okay? You need to have good tenants. You need to make sure that it's going to be a viable, money-making thing. One of the issues that universities have gotten into their problems in the last few years, they spend more than they make. And so one of the things is we cannot spend more than we make. And I don't think especially a private university like this, I don't think they feel any different than I do. But it's important for a research park, especially if you've been to USF in Tampa. We're kind of north of the city. We're kind of in an area that you don't want to go a few blocks to the west. And it's a nice campus, but we want people to come and locate there, but we have to find the best ways to do that. And the other reason is we want them to partner with university researchers. One way to change the culture is the need for money. Okay, and as faculty get less federal grants, they're going to want more partnerships with industry, and we have to make those things available to them. The other thing about technology transfer is, that I've been pushing in the last few months actually, and I've done this because I want to make sure that our technology transfer group at my university, for example, I'm giving you my examples even though I'm here on the NAI's behalf, is technology transfer is so important to a university that wants to really shift its culture and move into be an innovation and entrepreneurship. It's not just about the royalty revenue. Remember I said that it's important to see what kind of grants require IP and things, I think if you took those away, it would affect your grants. But also, there's increased opportunities for funding, just like that. It promotes a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation, just as we heard from the provost. It promotes student success. I think that Stevens showed that at the National Conference of the NAI last year by having, I think, one of the best presentations. I think Vicki had a student company from Stevens present, and I think everyone was taken by it. Great example about how student success occurs. I think your example about having entrepreneurship for all students in engineering, and hopefully all students, is a great, great example as a course. I wish we would do that. It offers increased prestige in fundraising efforts. It helps in faculty recruitment. It's interesting because when a new faculty member comes on board, a lot of them ask to talk to me because they want to know about royalty and patents, and all this stuff. And you actually take it one step further. I think Christos said that he meets all the new faculty, or tries to, because he wants to make sure and help see, do these people fit your culture? I think that's brilliant, and I think that's so important. It helps public benefit, and it helps economic development. And we actually wrote that recently in Nature. Valerie McDevitt's our TTO officer, and we have an article that we have coming out, kind of really highlighting this aspect about that it is more than money. So what about the National Academy of Inventors? So the National Academy of Inventors, because that's why you're here, a lot of you are here today, it really encourages and recognizes inventors with patents issued by the USPTO. That's its basic premise. So in order to be a member, one has to have a patent issued by the USPTO, a U.S. patent, not a foreign patent. And therefore, by definition from the federal government, you are an inventor. But you're also an academic inventor, which makes it unique, or you're with a nonprofit institution. And so we're also the academic collaborator of the USPTO. So the USPTO works with the National Academy of Inventors to outreach to the academic community. It enhances the visibility of academic technology. It encourages the disclosure of intellectual property, and the idea is to mentor innovative students. Many of the chapters and universities are very involved in these innovative students. Our chapter is heavily involved in that at USF. I know the Auburn chapter, Purdue is very involved, and it's very important for having innovative students. And then, of course, the idea is to translate our academic inventions for the benefit of society. So, we're a growing organization. We have 3 ways to be involved. One is we are a university or not-for-profit membership, and we've opened it up for charter members through this next meeting that we're going to be having in March. And right now we have 96 members, universities that are members. Let me just say that this last March we had about 45. So we've over doubled just in the last 6 months. My goal was by the next meeting to have 100. I'm hoping we'll have more. I think it's one of these things, the ball's finally starting to roll. Even the universities that felt that they already do this stuff and why would they need to join are starting to realize that there could be some benefit because they can even help. We're a network, and they can even help the network of universities be involved. We're in 32 states in Washington right now. A personal goal for the office is to try to be in all the states at this point. And then we would like to have certain states that actually we have all the universities in those states involved. New Jersey could be one of the first, actually, because we have, I think, Rutgers and Rowan and Stevens. I think we just need New Jersey Institute of Technology and Princeton and maybe one other one. Florida, we have all the state universities involved in Florida. We have University of Miami. I made a push for all of it. We also have the research, as you know, Jeb Bush brought in major research not-for-profits in, Scripps, Sanford Burnham, Max Planck, a number of these SRI into Florida, and most of them have joined. So there was congressional legislation that has put forward a resolution to honor and to set up the NAI. The resolutions are continuing on this. A journal's published called Technology and Innovation. I saw it in Christo's office, so I know at least it gets mailed out. And it's a journal that we would love to have any publications that you have to be submitted. The USPTO puts one article in every issue, so which is great. And please feel free to publish. I don't think you have to be a member even to publish. But it's in the 4th year of publication, and we also have the proceedings of the meeting as well. That'll be coming out, I think, in a few weeks for this last meeting. There's also a magazine in the inventors field, which is called Inventors Digest. It's actually kind of like popular science kind of thing. A lot of independent inventors read this. It's kind of They're a big magazine, and they like us, the NAI, and so they use some of our stories, actually, from Technology Innovation. They've reprinted them in their magazine, and they've announced our fellows this last year, and they'll continue to do so. We build relationships and connections. We're not trying to be competitive with any other organizations. We feel we have a unique niche to really help enhance entrepreneurship and innovation at universities and not-for-profits. We work closely with the Smithsonian Lemelson Center, Autumn, NCIA, ORAL, the National Inventors Hall of Fame, AAAS, and of course USPTO, Commerce Department. There's a number of organizations that we work with that are very important for us, and we continue to develop those relationships. And just to let you know, this was David Kapos, who was the former U.S. Undersecretary of Commerce for Patents. He was the director of the Office of Patents and Licensing, and he was the one who really encouraged us to really take this national. And he said to me that it's okay, we're doing great. We will be the arm, we'll help work with you and with the USPTO and help promote academic invention. But it would be nice to have a higher level award that is more on par with the national academies. And so one of the things then we did after talking to him was we started a fellows program. And I'll talk about that in a minute. With the USPTO and Commerce, we are having our next meeting at the USPTO. What the board of directors of the Academy have decided was that we would have every other meeting at the USPTO and then every other meeting at a university or not-for-profit. So this coming year will be at the USPTO. If you haven't been to the USPTO, it's a really nice facility in Alexandria, and it'll be, I think, a great venue for the meeting. We've been on the Metal Technology Innovation Evaluation Committee, Veterans Internship Program, the Journal. There's a whole bunch of things that we're trying to work with the USPTO on, and other things. They'll be announcing soon, I think it just got announced today in a newsletter for NAI, that we are involved with a number of federal agencies that are putting on a patents and commercialization course, an online course for, they give it mainly to federal employees, but also other employees as well. And then the NAI annual meeting. To me, that's the best part of it. A lot of fun, a lot of networking. I know I've been talking a long time. You're probably getting tired, but we hope that it won't grow much larger than 300 or 400 people eventually. We had 60 universities represented. We had our second meeting this last March. And we had the U.S. Commissioner of Patents, Peggy Falcarino, who's an honorary member of the Academy, who presented the Fellows Award. And in fact, there is a wall in the Innovation Office where that plaque she's holding is there, and all the fellows for the NAI over the next years will be on display. I'm hoping to give them a plaque also, the charter member institutions, that will be on display in the federal building there. And then our keynote speaker was Bob Langer. I know the engineers here will know who Bob Langer is. He was great, and from MIT. He was really our first fellow inductee because he could only be there the first day, and so we gave him his trophy the first day. The fun story about that, since it's kind of is that I got an email from him afterwards, and the trophy is quite interesting. You'll see it, but there's a world on it. And I guess the world was upside down. So he said, Paul, you may want to check all the trophies for the next day because the world was upside down. And so I immediately get to my assistant, and I said, oh my God, we got to go. So we run into the room, and we're looking at all the trophies, and they're all the right way. So for some reason, only Dr. Langer's trophy was upside down. So, so I wrote about, well, you turn the world upside down, and, and all these things. So anyways, he wanted the real trophy, so we ended up getting another one. So everything was good. Great guy, great supporter of the Academy now. These were some of the top, so we started this Fellows program. The Fellows program was one at a higher level that these people would be, we think, equivalent to people and fellows of other organizations or equivalent to the national academies. These are people that have made real important, they've either done lots and multiple patents, lots of licenses. They were senior leaders of their universities or institutions and really helped push innovation, et cetera. Of our fellows last year that applied, we had 56 universities and nonprofits represented. Collectively, they held 3,200 patents, these 101 folks. Amazing. And I'd say almost half of them were members of other national academies already. Or they were inductees of the National Inventors Hall of Fame, had the national medals. We had 8 Nobel laureates as well. We had heard from academic analytics that they would recognize this fellowship award as a high-level award. So that was important, and I think that got reflected this year because we had more applicants this year. But I think you'll be impressed with those when it comes out, and they'll be announced probably first week of December. So in the Chronicle of Higher Education, we put out a full-page ad honoring the fellows in the academy. You saw my initials in the first thing. I put that in at the end. I took all my degrees off. I said, I'm just going to put FNAI. They actually can use it. I kind of modeled after when we put it together, I'm a fellow of a number of Royal Society things, and they have, you now can use FR or whatever. And so I thought this will be great for this. So if you become a fellow, you get that on the thing. You can use those four-letter F word there. Okay. Also, the congressional record, the extension of remarks that they congratulate the fellows, and you can see the bottom right there, I kind of highlighted that for you. You had a fellow last year, Victor Lawrence, from the Stevens Institute. Is he in the audience? Oh, well, we should congratulate him if you haven't already. And there he is. There's Victor. And that's can you see the trophy? So you can see how the world could be upside down there as well. I know that Stevens had a few applications, nominations for fellows this year, and you'll hear about them in the first week of December. Okay, so now we get to the part that I really am passionate about, and I know that listening to your provost and Christos as well, your vice provost, is about changing the culture from research and publishing as measures of promotion and tenure. And you heard about the article that I wrote. Actually, I wrote that with Ashley Stevens, who was president of Autumn at the time. We actually did, it was a co-thing with Autumn. And that article was really important, I thought, because it showed that there was a trend at universities that they were starting to use patents, licensing, commercialization as a measure of promotion and tenure. So we had a panel on this. We try to have a president's panel each year. We will have a president's panel this year at the annual meeting, and these are presidents of universities that come together to talk about a certain issue. So the issue that we had for these presidents this time was, would Thomas Edison receive tenure? And for those that were at the meeting, I thought it was a great panel. Each one from a different university. We had Caltech, Minnesota, Alabama, Birmingham, Delaware, and Purdue. In fact, Tim Sands was the president of Purdue at the time, and Richard Mark Chase was the president of Alabama, Birmingham at the time. And they really went through it well, to the point that, most of them said he would get tenure, even in spite of traditional academic values. In fact, one of them even had a diploma at the end saying you're tenured, to Thomas Edison. Now, the question would really be, since Thomas Edison was from New Jersey, whether a New Jersey school here would give them. I don't know. Do you think Stevens Institute would have given Thomas Edison tenure? So, this is a paper that came out of the President's Panel. And the President's Panel, even though the thing was about Thomas Edison, as I mentioned, it was really about changing the culture and about tenure and promotion. And so this article has been written. It's been submitted for publication by the presidents and vice presidents that were on here. And so I hope to be able to tell you that that gets accepted at some point. So we'll see how that goes. But again, this is our first white paper out of the Academy that really kind of pushes on this idea of patents and commercialization. So one of the other things that impressed me a lot about New Jersey was because I was very interested in the National Inventors Hall of Fame, I came out of there thinking there weren't many Floridians in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. And I happened to go to their last induction meeting. I was invited. And so I wonder if any states have an Inventors Hall of Fame. And it turns out New Jersey, I think, has the most robust Inventors Hall of Fame in the country as a state. No doubt about it in my mind. There's about 6 or 7 of them. And I noticed, in fact, that Stevens is, here you have inductees in this year of people that received awards from the Inventors Hall of Fame. And I just think that's incredible. So congratulations to Stevens for that. And I think what you've inspired us to do as well is that we want to change our own places. And so in Florida, we have started an Inventors Hall of Fame. Okay? And we now have this Inventors Hall of Fame. We have an advisory board. We'll be sending out nominations, and we'll see who we get. Okay? Now, I do know that Thomas Edison has a lab down in Naples. Fort Myers. Anyone ever been down to the Edison lab in Fort Myers? It's incredible. But he was down there, I think. As you get old and you get white hair, you want to be down in Florida more. So it was right next to Henry Ford's house, too, if you've ever been down there. Okay, so the NAI, we're having our 3rd annual conference at the United States Patent and Trademark Office in Alexandria. It's hosted by Georgetown, George Washington U, Smithsonian Lemelson Center, and the University of South Florida. This is a picture of, if you haven't been to the USPTO, and that the spire, that's the main entrance, and in fact, the National Inventors Hall of Fame Museum is on the right as you go in. And the hotel is very close. It's walking distance, very close. And I think if you get an opportunity to come to the meeting, especially all the new inductees as members, please do so. So I want to then congratulate Stevens Institute of Technology for being one of our early charter members, institutions, and having one of our first fellows, and also for inducting these members into the National Academy of Inventors. Thank you very much. So I think the process really is that the universities own the intellectual property. Okay, most universities that I know of will own the intellectual. You're an employee, just like when I was in a company. You're an employee, they own the intellectual property. But most universities give something back. I don't know what Stevens does. You can mention that because that's your area. But in Florida, one of the reasons I went there, people ask why, one of the reasons I went there because they were very generous. The state of Florida, the universities give back 45% to the inventors, okay? And then 10% goes to the inventors' laboratory. So you actually get 55% of the royalties, of the licenses that come in after the patent costs are all paid for. Okay, some universities do more than that. I remember University of Texas, Dallas, I think, does 80% to some of them. Some do a lot less. Okay, I think the more, but the average, we looked at the average because I actually had we did a thing, and the average is 35 to 45%, somewhere in there. Most universities give something back because it has to be an incentive for the faculty. But you're using their facilities. The grants actually don't belong to you. They belong to the university per se, right? I mean, when they come in, all these kinds of things, and your employees. So that's an important part. There is a push nationally by certain organizations that faculty may want to retain ownership of their IP. Now, at our university, we have, say, last year, I think we had about 160 disclosures. Well, we can't file 160 patents. We have to go through a process. We have to find what we think are the most valuable ones, and we file them. That might leave half the patents, half the disclosures where we say we don't want to file them. In that case, those disclosures go back to the faculty member. Faculty member owns all that IP. They can do whatever they want with it, okay? Most universities are like that. They get lots of disclosures because you can't do everything. So I think as you work with Christo's office, you'll learn something very similar to that. And I think that's just the education part, because if that is what bothers you a little bit, please work with his office, because I think you'll probably find that, in fact, there are lots of incentives for faculty to do this. Plus, if you start a company and you license it, you actually then can make money on the company side, and then being an inventor, you might make money on the royalty side as well. So there's lots of opportunity for faculty in this country to do well on their inventions. And I think this push for faculty to own it is probably premature. Where the real push is faculty are saying, well, my university may not be as good at this. I want to use a different university to push my technology. And that one's a bigger discussion.
We have this little, you have to carry it to Florida, but this is a plug that we give to the speakers of the series. And,
Did you just take a photo?
yeah, we can.